Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody. I have a lot of things to share with you, so I will go straight into the presentation. So, new ideas for a resource-efficient society. As Nahi already said, I think the most important is that we understand why this is actually so much needed in today's world. So, I will start with a short story of the presentation. What are the major challenges which we are today facing? This is the 20th century data looked through the resource use. The growth of population was by a factor of 3.7. Annual extraction of construction materials grew by a factor of 34. Ores and minerals factor of 27. Fossil fuels 12. Biomass by practically the same as growth of population. Total material extraction average grew by a factor of 8, and greenhouse gas emissions grew by a factor of 13. Some call the 20th century as the century of the great acceleration, but we are not really slowing down. So let us see the taste of the 21st century. We have all got used that we will be some 9.7 billion till the mid of the century. Let me translate you that figure into a more human language. It means that in 1 year you will have on a planet additional population of Germany. In 4 years you will have additional population of United States. All that is happening in least developed part of the world, which means, since they aspire to live as well as we do, that the need for additional resources will very likely be enormous. 8 people own the same as the poorest half of the world. The richest 1% is more wealthy than the rest of the world. 800 million people are hungry. Over 2 billion suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. Over 2 billion people are obese. We throw away 1/3 of the food we produce. More than half of the cities which will exist in 2050 are not existing yet. And China has used in the years 2011, 2013 more cement, China has used more cement than the United States in the whole 20th century. There is an increasing evidence of the climate change threat. 60% of the ecosystems are already degraded or used unsustainably. Biodiversity is disappearing quicker due to the presence of humans. 85% of world fisheries are beyond or at biological limits. 1/3 of all soils is degraded or used unsustainable due to various reasons. 7 million premature deaths yearly globally, and almost 500,000 due to the air pollution, which is approximately 20 times more than in car accidents. And 1 million of plastic bottles are bought every minute, and we recycle less than 10% of plastic today. More than almost 80% still goes to the landfills and to the environment. Nearly half of the work we do will be able to be automated by the mid of the century. Concerning in 1997, if you remember, Garry Kasparov he was beaten by a computer, but this computer was entirely programmed by human. Last year, Kiji, the world Go champion, which is more complicated game than the chess, was beaten by a computer who was not programmed. Just the data was given to the computer. So we are very much in the era of artificial intelligence, as you know. For the first time in the human history, we face the emergence of a single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. We are more interconnected, more interdependent than we have ever been, which is, of course, raising our responsibility, individual and also collectively. So, in short, we need to refocus. So let me just give you 3 examples. One is this, which is basically from the Club of Rome. They are claiming that we have moved from so-called empty world to the so-called full world. Empty world was dominated by nature. Full world is dominated by humans. In empty world, labor and infrastructure were limiting factors of human well-being. In the full world, natural resources and environmental sinks are limiting factors of human well-being. So, if there is something which is entirely fact, it's that in the 21st century, unfortunately, we have no luxury anymore to think short-term. And in many cases, you know that our life is exactly built on short-term logic. This is also a nice expression. This is a so-called DPSIR framework, which is the scientific approach which we use more or less, in particularly in environmental science. D stands for drivers, P for pressures, S for state, I for impact, and R for responses. Too many times our focus is on the state and impact. Actually, climate change, it's state and impact. Biodiversity loss, it's state and impact. Whenever you say pressures and drivers, you talk about humans, human activity, economics. This is important. Why? Because then your approach to policy making is actually different. Your responses are different. If you just want one example from current European behavior, when we talk about migration, what Europe is doing, it's building higher walls around Europe and putting more security at the entrance and more army on the streets. In essence, if we would really like to tackle that issue, we would need to start with drivers and pressures, and our policy would need to be Africa first. But we are not yet there. Our economy. What are the major things which we should remember of our economy? This is based on the data of last 40 years, which we have in International Resource Panel deeply analyzed. Consumption has been stronger driver of growth than the population growth. High-income countries are currently consuming 10 times more per person than low-income countries of materials. Global material productivity, that's actually the productivity comparing to GDP, has actually fallen from the year 2000, even if in all countries it's increasing, which is surprising. But this is happening due to the structural change that a lot of production is shifted from high productivity countries, efficient countries in materials to less efficient countries in handling materials. And the last, global material resource use, it's expected more than double till the mid of the century, which of course will simply not work. Why it will not work? If we look to this development trajectory, on the horizontal X you have Human Development Index. So more right you are, more developed you are. On the vertical X you have ecological footprint. Higher you are, higher is your ecological footprint. The dots are the countries. The dots surrounded red here are the European Union member states. And the green corner on the right-hand side contains all the countries where people are living well within the planetary boundaries. So practically none of the countries today in the world fits that kind of conditions. The real problem is that in the development, they all move up, and when we face the problems, then we start moving down. A lot of responsibility actually lies exactly in the developed part of the world, because we are those who have to show that we are ready and able to move down and help those countries which are here in the development phase to leapfrog and do not repeat some of the mistakes which we have done in our development. Let us a bit simplify how I see what is the real problem today, the bottom line of the problem in our economies. You know that we are living in market economies, and in market economies, the prices are actually those who decide who decide where the quantities will lie, where is the equilibrium. The price signals which we are currently sending to the market are, if I simplify a bit, financial capital, it's over-rewarded and overvalued. Human capital, it's under-rewarded and undervalued. And natural capital, it's not rewarded and not valued at all. That goes to the markets. We as producers and consumers behave rationally, apparently, and then we are surprised that we are living in an economic model which has inbuilt economic, social, and environmental imbalances. In a way, it's just a recognition that in reality the markets are working. So the situation would need to look like that. We would need to live in safe operating space where economic systems will be the functions of ecosystems. I will not go into detail. I will just mention that the major problem which emerged from the thing which I explained before, it's so-called environmental externalities. These are the costs which are already existing, but we are denying them. We simply prefer that either they are paid by the health system or what is normally the case, that they are paid by the next generations. This is the easiest because next generations cannot complain. So, in essence, we talk about profits which are privatized and costs which are, in many cases, socialized. If you would look to this, this is quite interesting. These are different measures of economic development. We normally use GDP. And these are the years 1990-2010 for the global economy. So global economy was growing 2% in that. If you add to that more social and natural considerations, Human Development Index, Genuine Progress Indicator, Inclusive Wealth Index, we actually find out that in the last 20 years we were not growing. Because if you include the costs which you do not include, you basically see that the growth, you would need to measure good growth and bad growth. And it's actually very difficult today since we are all focusing only on GDP story. So in short, what we need to remember is it's not helping if you are walking faster, if you are walking in the wrong direction. And sometimes when it comes to economy, this is exactly the case. Our commitment and our obligation came through the global goals, through the SDGs, which I consider as a kind of global agreement which all together has done, so to move to a better world. One of the conclusions from our scientific work is that trade-offs among 17 SDGs are undoubtedly existing, but the best way if you want to avoid those trade-offs is actually through sustainable consumption and production. So if you want to eradicate poverty, to eradicate hunger and so on, focus on responsible economies. Focus on responsible consumption and production, because that's the essence of the problem which we have to deal with. Resources are, in a way, the missing link in that story. This is basically the core approach which we are using in the International Resource IRP, International Resource Program. So human well-being can grow quicker than the economic activity. Economic activity should grow faster than the resource use. It should be decoupled from the resource use. And both economic activity and resource use should be decoupled from environmental impacts. This is pretty much essential if we really want to prosper in the future. Because if this will remain coupled, then we will be stuck in the problems. In the midterm, that's also a very interesting outcome of our work. In the midterm, there will not be resource shortage, which will really cause that we, as humans, will change our behavior, and that it will dramatically influence on the economics. In some cases, it will be, but not in majority of the cases. But what it will be, it's actually the irresponsible use of that resources causing us a lot of problems which we today see. So we have seen a few years ago that China has closed some 2,000 companies around Beijing. That was not because they were running short of resources, but because the use of those resources were causing the pollution which was forcing authorities to close those factories. So that's the reason why today we are forced to do some rethinking. Let me now move to the circular economy and circular economy prospects, because this is the theme which is connecting us. It started as a kind of environmental initiative, as was already mentioned. I basically proposed it as an environment commissioner. It was removed then from the agenda. In 2 years of the debate in Europe, it basically moved back on the agenda as a kind of economic initiative with good environmental and health consequences. But in essence, we should look to circular economy as a part of the bigger picture of societal and cultural transformation needed to sustain the humanity and its prosperity, and needed to create an economic model which will be in line with sustainable development goals. That's actually what is circular economy. Circular economy is an instrument for reaching somewhere. This is the most famous presentation. It was done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. On the left-hand side, you see the biotic resources. These are abiotic resources. Here goes from maintaining, reusing, redistributing, refurbishing, recycling. So recycling is the worst of the good. Some are many times confusing recycling. It's basically the whole story of the circular economy, which is totally wrong. So I think it's essential that we understand it in that way. So circular economy in one sentence would be how to keep the various types of resources in production and consumption system as long as possible and their value as high as possible, because that makes then economic sense. You can do it in various kinds of the ways. You can organize the production process in a different way. You can try to influence on consumers that they change the behavior. You can change the business models and so on. Here is a nice presentation which was done by Sun and Systemic Resolve. It's a kind of a menu of business actions for a better economy. I will not go into detail, but just that you know that there are various kinds of options. There is no real recipe which one can prescribe to you what you can use and what is the best in the specific case. Just two examples which are the most telling you so that it's the easier to understand. One is from the recycling. You can produce a wedding ring from 10 tons of gold ore or from recycling 10 kilos of mobile phones. Yet we are recycling less than 10% of mobile phones. If you don't believe me that more than 100 million each year staying in our drawers, then ask yourselves how many are in my drawer. That would mean, in European context, 2.4 tons of gold, 25 tons of silver, 1 ton of palladium, 900 tons of copper. And this is a nice periodic system which is showing you what is the percentage of an element which is recycled. Blue, it's more than 50, and red, it's less than 1%, and all the rest you can find in between. The second example, which is more circular type of example, is something which you are seeing today in front of our eyes, changing very quickly. It's the mobility system. The combustion engine, it's extremely inefficient, so less than 1% actually of the energy. The red dot on the top, it's devoted to moving people down the road. The rest, it's for moving the car, or it's simply lost. But even if you would change the engine, the problem with the car is that typical European car, it's parked 92% of time, 1% it's sitting in congestion, 1.6% it's looking for parking, 5% we are driving, but even when we are driving, in the 5-seater, it's at average 1.5 people sitting, which means that the utility of that product is 2.5%, and we are still buying it. So the fact is that this is the way how we need to go. Here it's the illustrative vision of the car of tomorrow, but it's not really about the car of tomorrow. It's about the mobility system of tomorrow, because you have to put it into the overall system and you have to design it in a way. It's going really quickly. So you will have sometimes in less than 10 years, some cities in less than 10 years, which will be without privately owned car, because privately owning the car in the cities makes no sense. Now I will just quickly touch upon the things which I personally believe they are the most important in moving in the circularity for the future. One is including the social aspect in that. So taking care for employment also, because this might be a bit problematic when you look through the circularity lenses. Taking care that you choose those options which are more close to higher employment than those who are not close. Second, it's connecting it to the climate change. There it's a major misunderstanding that we can solve the climate change with the programs which we currently have on the table. Imagine the world in which you would have abundant energy, cheap energy, and totally renewable energy. And at the same time, you would have current models of consumption and production and the growing population as you have seen. Do you think that we have solved the climate problem? No. It would just be really shifted from the energy sector to other sectors. But the real problem is that you need to connect it to the land management, water management, to the materials management, to decoupling story, to the economic story, seriously, because it's not enough if you approach only from the supply energy side, but also you need to approach from the demand side, which is very much missing today still in the policies. To give you just one example, two basically, this was done last year. No, actually this year it was published, Material Economics. I was in the steering committee. They were analyzing if you move to the circular economy, what would that mean for steel, plastics, aluminum, cement. Still, it's here in yellow or orange, whatever you want. And you see in different phases, material circulation, product materials efficiency, circular business models, how much you can actually save. And you can actually save more than half emissions which are currently existing if you use those models also through the materials today. Or if you look it through the mobility and the passenger car. CO2 impacts of materials, if you go to sharing models, can go down for 70%. Total cost of ownership for 77%, and externalities and cost to societies 74%. So that's the logic which you complementary the whole energy efficiency with the materials efficiency, and you start to think in a more broader aspect and incorporating circular economy into that kind of vision. Then the third, it's how to connect bioeconomy and the circular economy. The problem here, which is not so much yours, it's how to shift some of the products from this abiotic sphere to the biotic sphere. So from non-renewable to renewable, but you have to be careful because even the bioeconomy can be as damaging as the classical economy if you do not follow the sustainability and circularity principles. Then urban systems and circular, so how to use it through the all urban logic, sharing models, mobility, waste, recycling. Why urban? Because in urban majority of that it's simply happening, and there it's a lot of governance power which goes bottom up, and you don't need to wait for really the national and global developments. This is also extremely important, how to retain the value in the circular economy. Again, one example from the Swedish system, the case of plastics. Official figures are that Sweden is recycling 53% of plastics. But if you look to how much of the value it's retained, the overall value of plastic each year is approximately 10 billion crowns, 80% incinerated, 60% new plastics, 4% landfill. All in all, that is 1.3 billion crowns. So in essence, you are retaining 13% of the value. These are the targets which are driven by the national authorities, and these are the targets which are actually driven by you, economy. So that's driving you, and that's driving the public services. So it's obviously a kind of strong disparity existing. Then, of course, one important, it's sustainable financing. It's quite of a missing link. There is an European Union action plan on finance for sustainable growth. I don't know what are the global developments in this area. And finally, one important thing, it's about digital transformation as enabling condition, sharing new business models, informing consumer, new technologies, distributed ledgers, so all the things which are happening in this digital transformation. So a lot of the circular ideas already existed in the past, but we were not able simply to develop those business models because we didn't have the ability. And now digital transformation is enabling us. Very quickly, why resource management and competitiveness actually goes hand in hand. I will just present you the European case. You know that Europe is a major importer of fuels and mining products. You see here the difference. And if you look it through the 54 scarce and economically important raw materials, Europe in its entirely depends more than 90% on the import of those. This is very interesting. It's for the years 93-2011, so for 20 years, the share in German industry in the costs of materials and the costs of labor. So the costs of labor shrink for 10 percentage points and the cost of materials increase for 10 percentage points. All in all, if you look to the benefits moving towards circular economy, green is circular scenario and blue is current development scenario. This is household disposable income, GDP, direct user cash out costs, societal costs, CO2 emissions, primary material consumption. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go in details, but practically in all circumstances, circular economy scenario makes economic, social, and environmental sense. So to conclude, New economic model based on sustainable consumption and production, integrating all pillars of sustainability, it's simply necessary and also unavoidable. That's important to understand. It's unavoidable. We have to fix our broken compass. When it comes to International Resource Panel, these are our recommended policy strategies: set targets and measure progress, act on key leverage points across all levels of governance, take advantage of leapfrogging opportunities, implement a policy mix that builds incentives and correct market failures, promote innovations towards a circular economy, enable people to develop resource-efficient solutions, and unlock the resistance to change. And one thing which is connected with all of you, with the business sector, which is really important that we start to look at differently. I have sensed that already from what was said that your sustainability, that you are pretty much leaning into direction of sustainability. It's that all the business, be it an agricultural producer or a steel producer, shift from being only a risk manager of its own activity to a risk manager of the whole society also, because we share responsibility of managing the societies together. These are some of the conclusions from this World Economic Forum annual meeting. Complexity and scale of these challenges requires new forms of collaboration and more systematic approaches. The challenge seems not to be inadequate scientific evidence anymore, rather cooperation and implementation, and there is a deepening perception of a lack of synchronicity between economic and environmental policy responses to global crises. So what would actually need to change? In a way, we would need to redefine sovereignty and cooperate more than we have done that in the past. We need to align the rules so that we could be able to move that kind of economic model on a global level. And one really good model of how we have raised the sovereignty on the higher level is actually exactly the European Union, because 70 years ago, to avoid the conflicts and wars, we have decided to share responsibility on many issues on European Union level. So if we are frank, the world is today pretty much ahead of the same challenges. If we want to avoid conflicts and wars in the future, we need to cooperate more due to the challenges which we all see, due to the challenges which we all understand and face. So if we are to avoid globally extensive intersystemic crises and frequent conflicts, then let's get serious about implementing what we have agreed in SDGs. Changes are unavoidable and humans are supposed to be intelligent. It's high time to prove it. Change will not appear by waiting for the leadership of others. Be the leaders on your level of governance, authority, in politics, in business, academia, civil society, in making your investment decisions. Some are saying that this is a story of gloom and doom, but I firmly believe that any global transition, it's a major new opportunity for the innovation, for new development opportunity, for new jobs, for those who understand, who dare. And alternative, it's something which I would rather not think and talk about, because it's really the story of gloom and doom. So the circular economy genie, it's out of the bottle. Major economic actors have moved. Circular economy connects competitiveness and sustainability. Circular economy, it's about transition to a SDG compliant economy. The major problem for me is how to overcome the major question, short-termism, which is inbuilt in our democratic political systems and institutions, public, financial, which is in fundamental conflict with the system change which we would need. So when Alfred, this is the last slide, when Alfred Einstein was asked, and this is pretty much the answer to the question before, why it is that mankind has stretched so far to discover the structure of the atom, but we have not been able to devise the political means to keep the atom from destroying us, he replied, that is simple, my friend, it's because politics is more difficult than physics. So circular economy and everything what I have tried to share with you, it's to a large extent a story of physics. So you can't go where you can't go. But unfortunately, the answers are pretty much lying in the hands of politics. So let's hope for the better. Thank you for your attention.